Conversation with State Representative Jim Struzzi, brought to you today by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. He was talking Reggie yesterday. I want to talk to him about something different today. But first, as we have you on the air, Jim, tell me about the rally yesterday and the governor's response.
Well, yesterday was a great day for our efforts to educate people on the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, Todd, and the impacts that may have on Indiana County, particularly in our coal-fired electric generation plants and the fossil fuel industry. It was put together by the PA Power Jobs Organization and the Senate Environmental Resources and Energy Committee. Senator Pittman was there as well, along with a number of my colleagues from the House and Senate. It was held in Cheswick at the generation plant there. Really a great event to showcase, the loss of jobs that could occur with Reggie, the impacts that it will have to not just Indiana County, but to the entire Commonwealth. So I had the opportunity to speak about House Bill 2025. As you know, the bill that I introduced and it has passed out of the House and it's in the Senate right now, that would require any type of multi-state pact for Pennsylvania to enter into be presented as a piece of legislation so that the General Assembly can represent the voice of Pennsylvania residents when we consider things like Reggie and other multi-state compacts. Because really, from what's happening right now, the governor and his administration are only looking at this from one side, and that's the environmental side. They are not considering the impacts to the Commonwealth economically, the impacts to our job losses, the impacts to our tax revenues that will be lost, the impacts that will create leakage in that, our jobs will go to Ohio and West Virginia, our jobs that are in the energy sector. And not to mention the fact that, currently Pennsylvania is an energy exporter. And if Reggie is implemented, by all indications, we will become an energy importer. And to me, that's just going to create dire consequences for the entire Commonwealth.
Yeah, it goes all against the identity, especially for us here around these areas. We're like the energy supplier to the entire eastern seaboard here in Indiana County. All right, but that wasn't even why I wanted to speak with you today. PBMs.
Right.
That's something that at the beginning of the year we probably thought would become a really big topic, but the pandemic sort of overtook it. All of these other issues that have come up, but still... it is an extremely important piece of legislation trying to make its way through and running into some snags. First of all, Jim, PBMs. Explain what a PBM is to folks.
Well, sure. A pharmacy benefit manager is sort of the go-between for pharmacies that establishes the prices that they will be reimbursed, the cost essentially that pharmacies have to pay for certain prescriptions. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, as you've seen here locally with a couple of our smaller pharmacies, they were not able to sustain the impacts that the PBMs have had on them. Essentially, they're paying more for the medications that they're giving to their customers and not getting enough back. And as you know, in any business model, that's not going to work. And unfortunately, because of the PBMs, those prices were established, and there really wasn't any control given. And I think, I believe, years ago when they implemented the PBMs, it was intended to be a good thing to control those costs. But unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. And we've seen that tragically in some of our smaller pharmacies here in Indiana County and across the Commonwealth being forced to close because they simply were not getting enough in reimbursement.
Independent pharmacies are having to compete against bigger corporate type pharmacies, national type pharmacies that not only can absorb losses, but have the ability to get drugs at greatly reduced prices. And the competitive balance just is lost. And so bills introduced in Harrisburg, you're involved in them, right, to even the playing field, I guess is the easiest way to put it.
Absolutely, Todd. And a number of our local pharmacy representatives came to me when I first took office and explained the situation to me, what was occurring. And so I co-sponsored a number of bills to try and address this problem. A couple of them did pass out of the House, as you mentioned. Actually, House Bill 943 that would create the Consumer Prescription Drug Pricing and Freedom Disclosure Act actually passed out of the House, passed out of the Senate, and was signed into law by the governor. But that's not the bill that's in question. The one that you and I wanted to talk about today is House Bill 941. And that did pass out of the House, and it went to the Senate. But unfortunately, in the Senate committee, they added some amendments that have really made it difficult for this bill to move forward now. And I think their intentions were good, but unfortunately, the burden for the reimbursement to even that playing field, as you said, has now gone to Medicaid or Medicare, and that creates a substantial burden, essentially, on our taxpayers. And so, while I think the intention of the amendments were good, which I can explain that, Todd. Essentially, what they did, the Senate changed the language in the bill, and they added an amendment that says that the retail pharmacy acquisition price has to be the same as what is reimbursed to the smaller pharmacies that are in the medical assistance realm. Unfortunately, that's a high price, and it also added a dispensing fee. And apparently, as I'm interpreting this, that creates a very heavy burden on, as I said, Medicaid and Medicare, which, as you know, are taxpayer funded, and that's where I think the holdup is in moving this bill forward now.
Yeah, and it's the bottom line is, though, that while this is being wrangled over in Harrisburg, and I assume in other states as well, while they're fighting it over in legislatures and general assemblies such as ours, small pharmacies are going out of business.
Yeah, and unfortunately, because of the COVID pandemic, these bills were set to move earlier this year. And perhaps if we could have moved them at the beginning of this session, we could have saved some of our smaller pharmacies that have closed in recent months here in Indiana County. So it's truly tragic. It's tragic that this had to occur from the beginning, that this couldn't have been addressed sooner. And I think it's really one of those things where you're trying to do something good, I believe, and unfortunately it results in unintended consequences, and it affects our locally owned pharmacies.
It's interesting to me that the amendments that have been attached to the bill, and we know how sometimes bills get bogged down by the amendments added to them, but they come from both sides of the argument, and that makes a whole bunch of weeds to have to hack away at in order to get to what the bill really should be doing.
And that is part of the legislative process. Bills are introduced, amendments are introduced, and we as the General Assembly vote on them, and that's the legislative process. And unfortunately, you're right. Sometimes amendments are added, whether they're intended to be helpful or not, and they can bog down a bill, and that's the legislative process. And unfortunately, I think in this case, it has stymied House Bill 941 from moving forward. Now, I don't know, what's going to happen in the Senate if they can continue to work on it and send it back to the House for our concurrence. But right now, it looks like this bill is going to stay in the Senate, from what I'm being told. Yeah,
and so that the situation as it currently exists is going to go on. That's unfortunate because these pharmacies, such as Gaddy, which had to close, the Klingon Smiths, and people driving 422 through Shalocta, they see the big signs that say PBM killed this pharmacy, and they probably wonder, well, what does that mean?
And that is exactly what it means. And I know that the pharmacy out in Shalocta has that big sign, and they also have a web address where you can go to learn more about this. And all you have to do is look up PBMs on the internet, and you'll find a plethora of different articles and viewpoints on it. But essentially, it is, as I explained earlier, they simply weren't reimbursing these smaller pharmacies enough money to cover the cost of their prescriptions, and it's truly a disservice to the people who benefit from their local pharmacies, who have that personal interaction, because they were not able to get the medications they needed from the small pharmacies. The small pharmacies couldn't handle those costs, and as I said, that's a failure in any business model, and unfortunately, this is caused by government regulations and something that was done years ago, I believe intended to be helpful, but again, created unintended consequences.
There is an overriding feeling, I think, about the General Assembly as a whole, from some of the comments that I've read in the past 6 months, that this year in particular was going to be a year of great change, and there were some really ambitious bills in the process of changing lives for Pennsylvanians that all got sidetracked or hijacked by the pandemic. That unintended course that we set out on at the beginning of the year, the ship just started sailing in another direction, and we still haven't been able to circle back around to where this legislative year should have gone, or where you might have preferred that it go. What are some of the other issues that you wish you had been able to tackle this year that because of the pandemic you have not been able to?
Well, I'll tell you the biggest one, and I think it's on the minds of all Indiana County taxpayers, is the elimination of real estate property taxes, Todd. We had assurances from our House leadership that we were going to run a number of bills to address property taxes this spring. And unfortunately, as you said, because of the COVID pandemic and the shift in our focus to deal with the pandemic and provide the resources and the legislative adjustments that were needed, that got pushed to the back burner. And unfortunately, I don't think you're going to see those introduced again this session, although a number of us would like to see that happen. I don't know if that's going to happen. But property taxes clearly were something that we had on our legislative agenda that did not happen because of the COVID pandemic. And I'm sure there are a whole list of other bills. You know, we're into the range of 2,000 and more bills being introduced in the House this session. And a number of those have been pushed to the back burner and probably until next session, unfortunately.
Yeah. Of course, close to your heart is the Codys Law legislation. Is there any chance we can get that thing pushed through?
I am very confident that that's going to occur. I have spoken personally with House leadership and with the Senate and working with Senator Pittman. He knows that's a priority for myself and Indiana County. And Joe and I are a great team. And with his help in the Senate and with the majority leader's help, I'm confident that Codys Law will get across the finish line this session. I'd also like to see some of the bills that we had in the first responder firefighter packages. The tuition assistance bill that I introduced, I'd like to see those bills move forward. And now more than ever, given what has happened in the past 7 months, those bills are essential to provide what we need to keep our volunteer organizations moving. So those two, I have personally reached out to try and see if we can get those pushed here before the end of this session in December. But I do have assurances that that work is underway. So I'm hoping that we can get those two across the finish line, Todd.
Seems as if those particular bills, everybody would be on board with them. They just need to get moving. All right.
Absolutely.
Representative Jim Struzzi, thanks for being with us today. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Todd.
All right. Bye now.